welcome to Games as Lit 101. I think one of my favorite kinds of stories is the kind that takes a concept or format that's kind of predisposed toward frivolity or shallowness and turns it into something with a lot of depth and meaning. This is what wormed How I Met Your Mother into so many hearts. It's what got shows like Steven Universe the huge and varied fan base it has, and it's what made Mad Max Fury Road such a hit a few months back. All of these things started with one thing or another that doesn't usually facilitate narrative depth, like the sitcom format and laugh track, the label of children's show, or the heavy focus on eye-popping action scenes, but each of them put so much artistry, meaning, and genuine effort into them that they ended up being way more than those elements would suggest. And I love seeing that happen. So you can imagine that the basic concept of Little Inferno was one that caught my attention right away. To quote one of the game's creators, Kyle Gabler, we'd been noticing a trend of games that were like slightly interactive screensavers, like a virtual aquarium or a virtual garden, and they seemed so obviously terrible we thought it would have been brilliant if the developers had hidden a terrifying plot and genuinely great game just below the surface, and maybe only a few players would ever actually discover it. We loved the idea of creating something that appears to be a silly casual game on the surface, but that gradually becomes a little self-aware, maybe a little terrifying, and keeps going. A fireplace simulator seemed like a good, suspiciously simple cover. Indeed, the trend he's referring to here is the popularization of simple games for platforms like social media networks like Facebook and mobile phones. With the advent of such platforms, which had a big emphasis on social interaction and generally only hold attention for a few minutes at a time, a new genre of video games was born to fit remarkably well within them. These games, like Farmville, Cookie Clicker, and even relatively active ones like Bejeweled, are all designed to keep you spending a few minutes at a time, all the time, and are ultimately kind of like candy. They're sweet, but don't really offer anything of value, just a temporary cure for boredom. This is the kind of game Little Inferno hoped to emulate and surpass. But of course you would only know all this about Little Inferno if you'd been following the game's development, and when it comes down to it, there's not usually much reason to follow the development of a weird little casual game time waster about throwing things in a fireplace, so no one really went into this expecting anything particularly great. At least until the game released in 2012 to actually kind of mixed reviews. As with a lot of experimental games, some critics were kind of confused and unsure what to think, while others caught on to what the game was trying to do and praised it highly. And indeed, it is a game that subverts your expectations in such a way that you need to go into it being kind of open to the idea that it might not be exactly what you think it is, else you risk completely missing the point when the game finally reveals its true nature. So what is that point? What did these people think they could accomplish by making a game inspired by casual games that are purposefully designed to waste your time? Well, the complexity of the answer may surprise you, so let's take a look at Little Inferno. Though first, I should specify that the deceptive simplicity of this game does not mean it has no story. Not only does it have one, but it's very reliant on a plot twist that this video, being a literary analysis, is going to talk about in full detail. So as a result, I highly recommend that you play the game before watching this video, lest you have it spoiled for yourself. It's available for very little money on a variety of platforms and only takes a couple hours to actually play through. So then, into the flames we go. At the start of the game, you get a letter from a weird-looking old lady named Miss Nancy, explaining that you've purchased a Little Inferno fireplace and she hopes you'll enjoy it. Also this. Whatever this is. She later explains that there are no points, no score, no time limit, just burning things and staying warm in the glow of your high-definition entertainment product. Yeah, if you're paying attention, you might already know where this is going. But she also says, you can't do that forever. There's bound to be an end. And this will be a surprisingly common statement in the game. It's important, but we'll get to that later. Basically, the way the game works is you burn stuff. Burning stuff produces coins, which you then use to buy more things from a catalog to burn. Each item has a shipping time ranging from 10 seconds to multiple minutes, and you can use stamps to expedite the process. Burning things unlocks more things to burn, and eventually you can purchase new catalogs with yet more things to burn. But if you want to unlock more catalogs and get more stamps, you also need to find combos, specific combinations of items you can purchase and burn that grant you stamps and get you closer to those shiny new catalogs. If this gameplay setup seems like it wastes your time and is really just a few microtransactions away from scummy free-to-play models, you're right. Little Inferno purposefully wastes your time, but I think we'll see that this isn't without purpose. After you burn a few things, you get a letter from a strange little girl who calls herself Sugar Plumps. She mentions that it's cold outside, but she too has a Little Inferno fireplace. She comes across as quite immature in a cute but kind of weird way, and she continues her correspondence throughout the game. She later says that everyone she knows, and even everyone she doesn't know, has a Little Inferno, but also that the instructions said to be careful. There's something even more dangerous than fire. But of course she burned them, so she doesn't know what it is. And indeed, partially because of your limited inventory space, you do end up burning everything in this game. When Sugar Plumps sends you a picture of herself, you burn it. You burn someone else's family portrait. You burn a coupon for a free hug from Miss Nancy. Now, of course you don't have to burn everything, but you do only have so much space in your inventory, even after you expand it. So it's kind of necessary that at one point or another, basically everything go in the fire, no matter how sentimental or important. Sugar Plumps occasionally asks you to send her something, and when you do, she reciprocates with little gifts you'd probably expect to see from your 4-year-old niece or something. And again, we get this phrase, "It won't last forever." You also find out she's your next door neighbor, living right on the other side of the wall to your right. She even gives you some fancy fireproof curtains. We eventually get a bit of exposition on the world of the game and why we're sitting in front of a fireplace burning random stuff. It starts with a weather report stating it's going to be cold again, and every day is colder than the last. And again, that can't last forever. The report advises you to build a nice, cozy fire and stay warm inside. Reporting from the weather balloon, over the smokestacks, over the city. Then comes the full explanation in the form of an instructional video.
Hey kids! Do you like toys?
Yeah!
You know what's more fun than playing with toys?
Huh?
Setting them on fire! With your new Little Inferno Entertainment Fireplace!
Yeah! It's Little Inferno, it's Little Inferno just for me. I've got the fireplace that burns at 100 billion degrees. It's Little Inferno just for me. I've got these old toys. I've got this box of memories. We'll shove them in the fire and breathe in the flaming potpourri. It's Little Inferno just for me. When I thought playing with fire was dangerous.
Well, you're right. But up out of your chimney, way up in the sky, it's been snowing for years, and we just don't know why. Our world is getting colder. But there's no need for alarm. Just sit by your fire, burn all of your toys.
So yeah, the world's getting colder, and children especially, it seems, are being asked to simply stay inside and stay warm by burning all their things. So there's definitely something kind of dark going on beyond all this ridiculous, over-the-top cuteness.
It's Little Inferno just for
Alright, I'm just gonna cancel the Fatal Frame analysis. That's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. But you'll see, that's far from the only dark humor in this game. In fact, Little Inferno might be on my depressingly short list of excellent children's stories in video games, but I kind of hesitate to put it there because some of this stuff is actually really morbid. I mean, you have some typical over-the-kids' heads humor, like the wine bottle entitled Midlife Crisis Mitigator, or the low self-esteem action doll, or just creepy things like burning this bear. Then you have things like burning a cup of coffee. Or even worse, the school bus. A lot of this definitely qualifies as dark humor, but it has another function. It's kind of unsettling. It's hard to look at this game in the innocent way that it seems like characters like Miss Nancy want you to, or for that matter, the way that you probably expected to when you went into this game. It's not ridiculously disturbing or anything, but the game just never quite feels as laid back as it seems like it should. The game continues like this for a long time. It only takes a few hours to complete, but the first couple are basically just comprised of burning things while occasionally talking to Sugar Plumps and getting updates on the weather that still just come down to, yup, still snowing. But the creepy undertones start becoming creepy overtones. The music during Sugar Plumps' letters becomes a little more foreboding, and she starts thinking more and more about what else there is beyond this fireplace we're staring at. She says she's trapped here, just like you. Starts wondering about the other people, all of them out there in their own houses, staring at their own little infernos, about why she's the only one actually talking to others. Eventually, she even challenges you in a way that seems suspiciously directed at you, the player, not just your character. Then things start getting weirder. And eventually, all this comes to a head in kind of a terrifying way. The earth rumbles, dust rains from the ceiling, and Sugar Plumps' letters tell of fire, pain, and transcendence? Death? A klaxon roars, a scream amidst the sound of crashing rubble. Burning debris falls into your fireplace, and Sugar Plumps' curtains burst into spectacular flame. The weatherman soon confirms what you fear. A house has burnt down, its resident lost, and a burned picture of Sugar Plumps. And with another warning that fire can be dangerous, and a reminder that there is something even more so, we're left to simply continue burning things. Thankfully, it doesn't end there. That would kind of suck, and what would it mean anyway? Play our game too much and you'll burn your house down? No. There's a lot more to Little Inferno than that. You do keep burning things for a while, though, as that's all there really is to do. But eventually, you get another letter. You get a few from this mysterious person, and the implication is that this is Sugar Plumps somehow. Her ghost or something. Says she turned into millions of little pieces and went up through the chimney with the smoke. And she's come back to bring you with her. And it's here, from Sugar Plumps no less, that we get some of the most important dialogue of the game, as her messages turn from foreboding to hopeful. She hasn't come to burn down your house. She's come to tell you how to do it yourself. Little Inferno doesn't matter, she says. It was designed not to matter. Some things are more special than other things, and some of these things are what you need to burn down your house and get out. 4 objects that you center. 4 symbols of your friendship, of something more substantial and more meaningful than Little Inferno ever was. And when you burn these 4 objects together, your liberation begins. And as your house explodes, shooting flame and smoke into the air, you remain. And you take control. Yes, Little Inferno does not take place entirely in front of a fireplace. There's a bigger world around you, and now that you've destroyed the object of your fascination, the game gives you the opportunity to explore it. You meet a mailman who mentions that he's been delivering packages for you the entire game. You never looked away, you never even noticed he was there, but he was. And he delivers a letter from Sugar Plumps explaining that she didn't burn up at all. She simply walked out of her house, like you did, and is now relaxing on a beach. You'll also notice that her writing has improved. effort, and she comes across as far less childish as a result. You come across the gate to the Tomorrow Corporation, and after you eventually ask him with enough gusto, the gate man lets you inside, where you come face to face with Miss Nancy. Honestly, I wish I could go into full analysis mode on nearly every line of dialogue in this epilogue, but obviously I really don't have time for that. Suffice it to say, for now, this next conversation is particularly full of meaning and is actually quite a beautiful exchange, especially in light of the interpretations we're about to get into. I'm also going to emphasize again that I cannot actually replicate that beauty in a synopsis, and I recommend that you play the game if you want to actually experience Little Inferno. But the gist of it is that you can do anything you want, go anywhere you please, but you can't go back, and you can't go with her. She has dreams too, things she never accomplished, and in her words, then she takes off in a spaceship. So with Miss Nancy gone, you continue to the edge of town, where the weatherman is waiting with his balloon. And so you go, riding into the sunset to go wherever you want, and never come back. I think it's pretty obvious that there's something more to this game than just a stupid little fireplace simulator. But what? What does it all mean? Well, there are different interpretations depending on how deep we want to go. Little Inferno has multiple meanings, and to only go with one of them and ignore the others would be to ignore some pretty important elements of the work. So let's go over 3 different interpretations of Little Inferno, going from the most simple to the most complex. On the most basic level, and thus the most easily and commonly expressed by the game's creators, Little Inferno is a parody of a recent phenomenon of casual games. Not the entire concept of casual games, nor any one genre of casual games, but some specific tendencies of the genre as of late. More specifically, it's a parody of games that are specifically designed to keep your attention and take your money without really giving anything back. I won't get into all the game design theory here, but if you look at games like Farmville or Candy Crush, you can see how they are specifically designed to keep you playing and to inspire you to spend money to improve your game. Little Inferno, when you're just burning stuff, has many of the same trademarks. The central conceit is so simple, you basically just spend most of the time staring into some, let's be fair, dang impressive fire effects, without really learning anything or even improving any skills. When you order something to burn, you have to sit there and wait for the item to arrive, and you can speed it up by spending stamps, much like you can pay real money to purchase similar items in many free-to-play games. The visual and audio design is excellent, which serves to make burning things very entertaining despite still not being particularly enriching or interesting. Little Inferno is, as Sugar Plumps put it, made to not matter. It is, of course, important to note that none of these game design concepts are necessarily a bad thing. But, as this show has pointed out on multiple occasions, video games can, like any other art form, be meaningful, valuable. They can change lives and cultures in positive and important ways. And not entirely, but almost exclusively, these types of game design tendencies have been used to heavily compel the player to spend hours and days and weeks playing these games with satisfying and enjoyable but ultimately meaningless gameplay. On a basic level, Little Inferno is a satire in the most accurate sense of the word. People often seem to mistake satire for simple emulation, but if a work of satire is indistinguishable from the work that it is satirizing, then quite frankly it fails as a satire and becomes simply another example of what it was trying to make fun of in the first place. Little Inferno emulates what it is satirizing, but it also rises above it to deliver sharp criticism. Which leads us to the second layer of meaning in Little Inferno, and quite possibly the most important. It's a message about managing your time and making the most out of life. Let's think about this for a second. Little Inferno is the story of a boy who's so obsessed with a toy that he stares at it for we don't even know how long, playing it constantly to the point of not accomplishing anything else, and to the point of completely being oblivious to everything going on around him and not at all interacting with any of the people important to him. Sound familiar? The entire premise of Little Inferno is eerily similar to the insultingly stereotypical gamer, which is also part of a common narrative about millennials in the wake of the 21st century's technological advancements, like social media, smartphones, and video games. That Facebook is replacing face-to-face interaction, that video games are distracting from more worthy pursuits, and that there's some kind of binary distinction between the use of a smartphone and one's involvement in a real, fulfilling life. You see this narrative spun all over the place, especially as the internet becomes a more and more necessary and basic element of our lives, and while I could do an entire episode on exactly why it's a false, patronizing, and utterly ridiculous notion, I don't have time for that now. Point being, it's easy to think that Little Inferno may be encroaching on the same territory, that it's essentially judging you for playing it. After all, the boy in this story could only truly live once he stopped staring at the Little Inferno, that light show of entertainment and frivolity, and start pursuing his dreams, right? For that matter, he had to actually burn it up, completely destroy the thing that so demanded his attention so he could move on to bigger, more worthwhile pursuits. And I'm not gonna lie, that was my first impression as I went through the epilogue. But I think it's really important to remember that we gamers have a really deeply instilled defensiveness when it comes to our medium. I mean, we grew up with parents and politicians and all sorts of other authority figures telling us that games were evil and wasteful and we shouldn't be spending our time on them, and we tend to just jump immediately whenever it looks like anyone's saying the same thing, even if they might not actually be. I mean, quite possibly the biggest, most harmful overreaction in the history of video games is based on confusing this.
But remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
For this.
In Red Lake, Minnesota, Jeffrey Weiss killed 10 people, and they found that he trained on a video game to do it. Chris, you can't do something this well the first time you do it. And the fact is, it wasn't the first time. He was in a hyper-reality situation in virtual reality. The one common denominator among school shooters is the immersion in violent entertainment.
It's a completely understandable reaction, but it's also one that we need to learn to work past and consider logically before we actually make any decisions. So, while it's easy to read Little Inferno as some sort of weirdly hypocritical condemnation of video games and the people who play them, a closer inspection reveals that the criticism the game is trying to get at is actually a lot more specific and appropriate. Between the quite specific satire in the game's design and the word of the creators, it becomes quite clear that Little Inferno is not talking about video games as a whole, but about a specific type of game and a specific situation of play. I've made the argument multiple times on this show that we should be aware of the games we're playing and try to actually gain something valuable from our time with video games, exactly the same way we do with books. And Little Inferno agrees. Just a bit ago, we were talking about the specific kind of game that Little Inferno is attempting to satirize, and with that satire comes a message. The world is huge, and life is so much more than these fun, entertaining little things we have. It isn't criticizing you for playing games. It's imploring you, whatever you may do, to make your life one worth living and not waste it on trivial things that don't matter. I mean, why waste time on a game that's designed specifically to waste your time and money when you could be doing things that enrich your life in some way, like learning more about the world around you, calling your mother, or even just playing a more meaningful game? Fire is warm, it's useful, it's important, there's nothing wrong with it. But while the world is wasting away, it's now being used to escape from problems rather than solve them. People retreat into their warm houses with their little fireplaces and burn other things of importance, things like family heirlooms and beloved toys. Little Inferno is a parable, a story about a world wasting away while everyone escapes into a meaningless toy. The nature of the toy isn't the problem, but the escaping. the closing off of the world and all its grandeur in favor of this small window of purposefully meaningless entertainment. And the capstone on this message is one simple fact. Little Inferno can't last forever. I mean, the games it's parodying do. You can never beat Farmville, nor can you crush all the candy, and I'm fairly certain my smartphone still has my own personalized version of Ponyville on it somewhere, but Little Inferno constantly reminds you, it cannot last forever. Sometime, eventually, this will end. And it does. There comes a point where it communicates its message and releases you, as if it's saying, you've had fun, and hopefully you've learned something. Now go out there and apply it in that big, wonderful world. That's what grants us purpose. That's what makes this game worth your time. Not how much time you put in and how much fun you had, but what it means to you, how it affects you once you're back in your day-to-day life. The game constantly reminds you that this will end, that you'll eventually have to go back to your real life. And Miss Nancy even explicitly asks you what happens after you burn everything you can. And technically, you don't have to complete the game. You can just sit there burning stuff for hours on end and never take the initiative to burn those 4 items, never make your conscious decision to stop staring and leave. But Miss Nancy shows us there's always something more. No matter how much we've accomplished, no matter how much we have, there's something else out there, something amazing, and only we can stop ourselves from going out there and pursuing it. What should you do when you've already accomplished and gained everything you've ever dreamed? Dream bigger, because there's always something more. Now that's probably the most practical message of Little Inferno, and thus really the most important for the game to get across. But we're here to analyze this thing, so let's go all the way. There's one more interpretation of Little Inferno that runs even deeper than that, to the point of being almost entirely symbolic. Little Inferno can be read as a metaphor for childhood. Keep in mind that this reading is almost entirely symbolic, but the pieces fall together quite well. Childhood is a time that most of us consider to be relatively innocent. We were, to one degree or another, sheltered from some of the pretty messed up stuff that can happen in the world so that we could spend the first few years of our lives simply enjoying ourselves and learning the basic facts of how to be a decent, knowledgeable person before we had to deal with the complications and difficulties of life. Similarly, Little Inferno presents to us a world that is cold and harsh, and getting more so by the day. So a motherly figure gives you something fun to play with, something with a variety of elements that may be enjoyable, emotional, or even educational, but that ultimately isn't as meaningful as what can be done out there, what you're maybe not yet mature enough to do. But eventually, that time must come. As the game regularly reminds us, this can't last forever. But the most important detail in this interpretation is that no one comes along and burns down your house and drags you out into the big, great open world. You do it yourself. Sugar Plumps enables you to, but you're the one who ultimately takes the initiative and makes the decision to leave your comfortable, cozy life and go find out what else is out there. As I mentioned before, you don't technically need to complete the game. If you wanted to, you could just sit there in front of the fire, burning things and staying warm, never facing the bitter cold or discovering what else is out there. You could choose comfort and safety over knowledge and the human experience as a whole. But as scary as it is, as big and cold and bitter as the world seems, there comes a point where we're less off for avoiding it. If we take it on, though, we'll find the world as a much bigger, brighter, and better place than it seemed. There is indeed something more dangerous than fire. Fire was actually the source of our liberation. In the end, it was never the danger to begin with. That was the compulsion to remain lost in it. The inability to see the world around us and realize it needed us in it. Another thing the game repeats throughout its latter half is that you can go forward, but you can't go back. Again, very true of childhood. We can go as far as we like, do whatever we want, but we can't go back to how things were. Miss Nancy also adds that we can't go with her when she leaves, which is a particularly heartbreaking moment when looking at her as a mother figure. The gate man also says something along these lines, specifying that not only can't you go back, but whatever you learn, you can't not know again. Which is reminiscent to me of I Know Things Now from Into the Woods, though thankfully significantly less creepy.
Isn't it nice to know a lot? and a little bit not.
In this metaphorical interpretation, the world isn't growing colder until it eventually slows to a stop. But your life is going to be doing something kind of like that if you stay where you are. It's a game about growing up and about change, about facing it and making something of yourself even when it seems scary or uncomfortable. It's a coming-of-age story in the most classic of senses, and a pretty powerful one. So what does this all mean, taken as a whole? If Little Inferno has these 3 different interpretations, then what do they all come together to make? This is definitely a game with a message, but for how darkly satirical it can be, it's not judgmental. If anything, it's actually kind of uplifting. One could easily compare it to Spec Ops: The Line, in that both took a specific genre of video game and emulated it for the purpose of speaking out against it, but Spec Ops was very indicting. It wanted to make you feel bad for playing it, and it did. It made you feel very bad for even enjoying it. But Little Inferno doesn't do that. It doesn't want to make you feel bad. It wants to inspire you. That's nothing against Spec Ops: The Line. It's an absolutely brilliant work that I will definitely be analyzing sometime later down the line in this series, but it's a notable difference between how it and Little Inferno go about what is kind of a similar end goal. With the way that Little Inferno sets itself up as a satire, it's not nearly as jaded or cynical as you would expect it to be. In fact, I'd argue the game ceases to be a satire the moment you leave your house, and instead becomes something of a fable. Sugar Plumps says that Little Inferno was made to not matter, but she never says it's evil or stupid, and in fact fondly remembers the days they sat in front of it for hours on end, thinking it would last forever. Even the tone and portrayal of that final encounter with Miss Nancy isn't particularly satirical. She's not portrayed as some sort of Zynga-esque monster CEO who profits off others' wasted time, but a quirky and experienced person who's out living life, just as she wants you to. Little Inferno, Miss Nancy, and the Tomorrow Corporation aren't painted as evil or even mildly villainous. The whole game just wants you to experience life, and it does so not by accusing you of wasting it, but by showing you what wastefulness looks like, how it feels, and encouraging you to go out there and live. And so I can confidently say that Little Inferno is, at the very least, a remarkably well-made work of interactive art that manages to effectively communicate messages both about the medium in which it's made and the lives of those who play it. So I hope you've enjoyed this look into the deeper meanings of Little Inferno. If you'd like to hear more from me on this and other topics, make sure to subscribe to the channel, follow Games as Literature on Twitter, and like it on Facebook. And if you really like the series, please consider donating to the Patreon. All of those links are right down there in the description. Next week, we're going to talk about something that usually seems a little weird to most American audiences. The way Japanese visual novels tell romance stories aimed at men instead of women. And next month on Literary Analysis, you know, the last few games we've looked at in this series have had some deep, layered meaning behind them. I think it's about time we take a look at a series that clearly had some good ideas in that regard, but ended up burying them almost entirely under gunfire, impossibly muscular men, and chainsaw bayonets. So until then, class dismissed.